Benjamin Holt kept making the wheels bigger, taller than a man, wider than a door, until one steam tractor stood 46 feet across, 18 feet of iron wheel hanging off each side. It still sank into the peat. This was the peat country of the California Delta, black waterlogged soil that grew abundant crops and swallowed heavy machines whole. A steam traction engine on narrow iron wheels would cut straight through the crust and bury itself to the axles. Holt's first answer was the simple one: more wheel. If the ground couldn't hold the weight, spread the weight. So he widened the drive wheels and widened them again until the whole machine sprawled 46 feet across, a rolling monstrosity that was more wheel than tractor. It didn't work. The thing couldn't fit through a gate. It couldn't cross a bridge. It couldn't turn around at the end of a field without a fight, and it had gotten so complicated and so expensive that keeping it running became a full-time job by itself. And in spite of all that wheel, it still found a way to sink. The story goes that Holt thought about laying wooden planks on the ground ahead of the machine, a temporary road it could crawl along, board by board. Then he turned the idea inside out. Instead of putting the planks under the ground, he would wrap them around the wheels. Bolt a continuous belt of wooden slats into a loop so the machine carried its own road with it, and laid it down beneath itself as it rolled. The point wasn't only grip, it was flotation. Weight that used to ride on the narrow rim of an iron wheel now spread across a long, flat footprint, and the ground pressure under the machine dropped far enough that it could float over soil that had swallowed everything sent in before it. On a track of that design, one of his tractors finally crossed the same peat that had been eating his steamers alive. That is the invention everybody remembers him for. The crawler, the track-type tractor, the direct ancestor of every bulldozer on every job site in the world. Here is the part nobody tells you. The single best feature of that machine, the thing that makes a modern dozer, Holt didn't invent. He bought it. His own early crawlers still steered with a wheel. A tiller wheel stuck out in front of the tracks on an outrigger, dragging the machine left or right like the nose of a wagon. It was clumsy, and it was a holdover from the world of horses. Worse than clumsy, out on soft ground that front wheel barely steered at all. It plowed, or it slid sideways, and the operator ended up wrestling the whole machine just to change its heading. The elegant solution, steer by braking one track while the other keeps pulling, so the machine pivots on its own length, came out of England, from a firm called Richard Hornsby and Sons. Just before the First World War, Holt paid Hornsby £4,000 for the patents. The man remembered as the lone American genius of the crawler wrote a check to a British company for the steering principle that every dozer on Earth still uses. Pull a steering lever, brake one track, let the other keep driving, and the machine swings. Same motion, same principle. Bought and paid for more than a century ago. That is not a knock on him. Holt's real gift was never the single flash of insight. It was metallurgy and manufacturing, taking a field littered with other men's half-working patents and building the one machine that actually held together and actually sold. But it complicates the lone inventor story, and it is about to get more complicated. Because then there is the name. Everybody's heard the version where a photographer is watching one of the track layers churn across a field, and he says it crawls along like a caterpillar, and Holt says, "Caterpillar it is." Clean, memorable, almost certainly embellished. For years after those first runs, the company's own people were still calling the machine the mud turtle, the paddle wheel, the platform, the treadmill. Caterpillar's own historians will tell you Benjamin Holt didn't even like the name. His nephew and others had to talk him into it. The word that would end up on the side of the most valuable heavy equipment brand on the planet, the founder had to be argued into keeping it. Then came the war, and with the war came the story that made Holt a legend and the story that isn't true. You have heard that Holt's tractor gave birth to the tank. It is in every documentary, and it is pointed at the wrong machine. The famous British tank, Little Willie, then the rhomboid Mark I that everyone pictures, did not run on Holt tracks. Its early track assemblies came from a different American outfit entirely, the Bullock Tractor Company of Chicago. The Tank Museum in England is blunt about it. The tank that actually emerged in 1915 was built from other designs and other companies, not from Holt's. But the tank connection is real. It is just French. When Schneider built France's first tank, it built it on the chassis of the baby Holt. When the Saint-Chamond rolled out, it rolled on tracks taken from the Holt Caterpillar tractors already in France, hauling heavy artillery through the mud for the Allied armies. The Holt bloodline is there. It is just sitting inside the French machines, not the British one the story always hands him. And those artillery tractors were everywhere. Holt machines dragged the guns on every front. British officer Ernest Swinton stood up in Stockton, California in 1918 and publicly thanked Holt for what his tractors had done. The orders poured in. Holt borrowed heavily and expanded hard to build tractors for the military as fast as the war planners wanted them. That decision, the smart one, the patriotic one, the obvious one, is exactly what broke the company. While Holt chased the war contracts, his rival was playing a completely different game. Not Daniel Best, the older man Holt had fought in the patent courts years earlier and eventually bought out. This was Daniel's son, C.L. Best, running a separate, newer company. And while Holt built war machines, C.L. Best went to the federal government and quietly secured something worth more than any single contract: a guarantee that he could get all the steel he needed to keep building smaller tractors for farmers. Best stayed pointed at the plow. Holt was pointed at the front. Then the war ended, and the floor dropped out from under him. The armistice meant the Army didn't need the tractors anymore, so the surplus Holt 75s came flooding back onto the American market, sold off to farmers for about half the price of a new one. A farmer staring at a barely used Holt going for half the cost of a fresh one had no reason to buy the new machine sitting right beside it. Holt's own war tractors were now his competition, undercutting his own sales in his own showrooms. And the 75 was already getting old, outclassed by newer designs, including C.L. Best's Model A60, which came out in 1919. Holt got shoved out of the farm business he had started in and into road building and construction, just to keep the lights on. He didn't live to see how it ended. Benjamin Holt died on December 5, 1920, almost 5 years before the company called Caterpillar even existed. Within weeks of his death, the bankers who held the company's heavy debt forced the board to take their man, Thomas Baxter, as his successor. And then, in the spring of 1925, the two firms merged. The financially stronger company, C.L. Best's, combined with the market leader, Holt, to form the Caterpillar Tractor Company. Baxter was already gone. C.L. Best ran it for the next 26 years, all the way to 1951, and he became the first chairman of Caterpillar. The new company kept Holt's word on the door and Holt's invention in the dirt, but it ran on Best's terms, with Best's flagship tractors, the Caterpillar 60 and the Caterpillar 30, leading the line. Holt got the name. The man who spent years widening wheels until they stood 46 feet across, who bought his steering from the British, who had to be talked into calling the thing a Caterpillar. His word rides on every yellow machine on Earth. C.L. Best got the company.